Meow?
What you just saw was not a horrifying Sonic bootleg, but actually a figure from the Sonic Adventure toy line released by Toy Island in the 2000s. This was the second Sonic Adventure toy line after Resaurus went out of business. Sega quickly pivoted to Toy Island and created their line of 5-inch Sonic figures, which we will now take a more in-depth look at. Resaurus went out of business sometime during 2000, the same year these figures released, so that leads me to believe that these figures were likely in development around the same time as the Resaurus figures were cancelled. So Sega was either already planning on replacing Resaurus, or the turnaround on these figures was really quick, which would actually explain a lot about them. Wave 1 consists of Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Big, and Dr. Eggman. Each figure is 5 inches tall and comes with some accessories. We're going to start with Sonic first. Sonic here looks a little weird. And that is because he is based directly on the Sonic Adventure era artwork, specifically this one that I have found. Looking at the hand positions, I think this is the artwork they likely based it off of. As the figure goes, it does look a little weird, but it does have a charm to it. And since it is based on the Adventure era artwork, it does make it very unique compared to the other figures that we get of Sonic nowadays. The articulation is standard Kenner Star Wars type, 5 points of movement, head, arms, and legs. Sonic does include some good accessories though. Snowboard, 2 Chaos Emeralds, and some actual magnetic rings. You see the figure's feet have magnets in them that allow them to pick up the rings like they're in the games running over them. Overall, Sonic is pretty decent for the line, but unless you're really into like the Sonic Adventure artwork, I can't really recommend him specifically, especially since Resaurus did the same concept better, I feel. Before we move on to a different character though, I wanted to highlight that this Sonic figure also had a prototype release that had him very angry looking. I also want to mention the 10-inch talking figure, which does have 2 phrases that are from Sonic Adventure and voiced by Ryan Drummond. Here they are.
Ready to roll, Pip? Let's go! Oh yeah! This is happening!
But beyond that, it is just the same figure, just bigger, though the face does look a little better. Also, it does come with a blue base, as seen here with the prototype, which also does have an angry expression, just like the 5-inch version was supposed to. Now, with all that being said, let's move on to Tails. I'm just going to cut right to the chase. The Tails figure here is not good. He is extremely pudgy, his face looks really weird with his tongue sticking out, and overall he just has a really deranged look to him. I think he's based on this specific artwork, but yeah, they didn't do a great job of replicating it overall. Thankfully the accessories do make up for it. 2 emeralds, 2 rings, and a chow. Looks really good with the chow especially. Even though it is just a solid piece of plastic, it's a nice accessory to have. It also has a gimmick with his tails where you pull them up, wind them, and they spin like he's running. So yeah, Tails is sadly the worst figure in this first wave, and possibly this entire toy line, honestly. Wouldn't really recommend them. Like with Sonic though, Tails also does have a 10-inch talking figure, and you know what? This actually looks pretty good. The torso looks a lot more normal here. Makes me wonder if they just made one torso and shared it between the 2 figures. And the face, despite being the same, has a little less obvious. He does feature 2 phrases, which you'll now hear right now, also from the Sonic Adventure video game. Very questionable phrases aside, this figure is pretty good. His tails also do no longer have the rotation gimmick. Instead, they just rotate as articulation joints. So yeah, this is actually pretty good. If you can find one for a good price, I'd say grab it if you like talking figures like this. With that all said, let's move on to Knuckles. Now, Knuckles is actually the only one of these figures that I own, and that's pretty good, considering I think he's actually the best one. His figure's pose is clearly based on artwork, specifically this one where he's pointing at himself with his thumb. And you know what? They actually did a really good job of replicating it this time, unlike with Tails. And yeah, as for his articulation, it's the same as Sonic and Tails, except that his head can't rotate because of his dreads. His accessories are a little lame though. 2 emeralds, 2 rings like usual, but an item capsule is his unique one, which is just used to store the rings. Pretty lame, but of the main 3 trio, I'd say Knuckles is by far the best one. He looks the most like his artwork, and he has the best sculpt overall, I feel, for these 3. With all that said, let's look at his 10-inch figure. Talking Knuckles continues the trend of making the figures bigger like with Sonic and Tails. However, here the problem is his legs. They are a lot wider here than they were on the original figure, which looks weird. And he does have 2 phrases from Sonic Adventure, like the other figures, so here they are.
Let's
weird lines. But yeah, Knuckles is pretty good, along with Sonic and Tails in the 10-inch line, so I'm happy these exist. And here's the prototypes just to show off the bases that were going to be a little different. But with all that said, let's move on to Big the Cat. Now, unlike the others, Big the Cat actually looks really good. I think this could honestly pass for somewhat of a modern figure just by looking at him. Now, he is based on this artwork, I believe, because his pinky is out on this artwork. I could not find a person replicating the artwork exactly in the pose, but it does seem like it is based on that. Now, besides the fishing rod that I just showed, he does come with 2 Chaos Emeralds, 2 rings, and Froggy, which are pretty great accessories. And Froggy is even better than the Chow that came with Tails, as he actually has articulation. All of his limbs can rotate, which makes him the best figure of Froggy to date. So I highly recommend this Big the Cat, surprisingly. I think it is the best Big the Cat you can grab. Final figure that Toy Island produced for their Sonic Adventure line was Dr. Eggman himself. Or should I say Dr. Robotnik, because this was the final figure to use the Dr. Robotnik name on the box until the Sonic movies rolled around, where we got it again. Now, this figure has his hands open, which just makes me think that it's a pre-pose of some sort. Now, the way the hands are splayed open gives me deja vu of this render of artwork. However, setting them side by side, it doesn't seem to look the same, which means I could be wrong, so please let me know in the comments below. However, it does still ring with the adventure aesthetic vibe. Now, for accessories, it comes with 2 emeralds, a ring, and Kiki the monkey bandit with a bomb. And Kiki is actually posable, just like Froggy, which is an awesome accessory to include. And so yeah, Dr. Eggman's also pretty good, just like Big the Cat. Though he does look a little more distinguishedly adventure-esque than Big the Cat, I'd say. So I'd say track him down if you can, though do be careful, as a lot of the ones I see on eBay are missing their mustaches, so I'm assuming that piece is very fragile. That was it for Toy Island's Sonic Adventure action figure toy line. As you can see, the few of them don't hold up, specifically the main trio, even though Knuckles isn't as bad. I'd say, though, Big the Cat and Dr. Eggman are where this line truly shines, and are figures I wouldn't mind having one day. But they didn't just make action figures, they also had a different type of figure, which I'll now talk about. The final sort of toys that Toy Island produced were these Bendy figures. As you can see here, we got Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and even an Amy figure. Now, these figures all have their hands splayed wide open, and this is the set that was made in the 4-pack. Now, this 4-pack includes the 4 figures plus 2 Chaos Emeralds and a few rings. However, it wasn't the only way you can get the 4-pack, as there was also single releases that had the characters individually, but also featured characters of Big the Cat, who looks pretty alright, and Dr. Robotnik, who also looks pretty good. But what if I told you there was another character planned? You see, on the Raving Toy Maniac website, archived from 2000, we can see that beside Tails, there was supposed to be another character, and that is E102 Gamma. As you can see here in this box prototype version, he looks absolutely amazing, and it's really sad that he never got to release, especially since the only other Gamma figure we have is from Resource, and that thing is very, very expensive. But with that, Toy Island's tenure with the Sonic Adventure toy line came to an end. And that was it for their involvement with the Sonic history. Or was it? You see, in 2004, the Sonic X anime had begun airing in North America. Dubbed by the 4Kids Network, this show went on to become a huge success. And so Toy Island, despite not doing anything with this franchise since Adventure 1, decided to pick up the reins. Now, have they improved since their last few years, 4 years ago? No, they actually just reissued the same figures again, except now all the accessories have been stripped away, so it's just 2 Chaos Emeralds per figure. Except for Big the Cat, he actually does still have Froggy in the fishing pole, but his rings are missing, and that's because these figures don't have magnets in their feet anymore because there's no more rings to go with them. Really, really lazy effort here. Though, to be fair, Sonic apparently did get a new head sculpt according to the Sonic Gear website, but can't really say it's much of an improvement or any really different, to be honest. I think it still looks about the same, but I guess there is a slight difference. Yeah, these are kind of just lazy. I kind of expected them to do a lot more in the 4 years that passed since Adventure 1 came out, but I guess not. Oh, but don't worry, Toy Island tried again. You see, they re-released the same figure again, but this time they removed one of the emeralds and replaced it with a keychain of the character. Except, weirdly, Dr. Eggman. And yes, this is Dr. Eggman, no longer Dr. Robotnik. He comes with Cheese the Chow for some reason. I'm not entirely sure what the correlation there is, but yeah. There is also one other variant. Instead of having a big plastic insert on the front of the cardboard, we instead just have this little bubble that wraps the figure in it, and they also got rid of another emerald, so now it's just one. Really glad to see Toy Island is getting their money worth out of these molds that are already 4 years old by this point. Speaking of getting money's worth out of 4-year-old molds, the 10-inch figures were also reissued, but they removed the talking feature because I guess they didn't want to have the kids confused why Sonic doesn't sound like how he does in the show. Except I guess they changed their mind because there's also the actual 10-inch talking figures in Sonic X packaging. Now, originally, people thought these had new phrases from Sonic X, but no, a video of the Talking Sonic was uploaded, and it has the exact same phrases. Glad to see Toy Island is getting their money's worth again. And one more time as well, because the Bendy figures are also reissued. Here's the 4-pack, now coming with an extra emerald instead of some rings, and they also reissued their single releases as well. But to be fair to Toy Island, they did make new 5-packs. Up first is this one that comes with a golden Sonic. Why not Super Sonic, I hear you say? Because that would have required some new effort in the molding. But thankfully, we did start to get a new figure in this other 5-pack, as we actually got a Shadow the Hedgehog Bendy figure. And how does he look? Yeah. This figure is why this episode is now my Halloween special. But this Shadow Bendy was a sign of things to come, as after him we started to actually get new figures in the Meabot Series 1, which allows you to collect all 5 figures to build RBX-D05, who is not actually in the Sonic X show, but is instead in the pitch pilot. Starting with Sonic himself, we can see a much better face sculpt and body proportion. He's clearly designed to be put into a running pose, and he looks really good at that. Compare him to the Sonic X design, it looks fairly accurate to how it looks in the show. Especially when we put them side by side, we can see how much better this looks as an overall Sonic figure. Problem then comes when if you don't have him in the running pose, because then he just looks like that, and yeah, that's kind of funny looking, but still, this does show Toy Island was on the way to redemption, so I'd recommend him if you can track it down and want a good Sonic running statue. However, this wave features a second Sonic that's more of an action pose. It comes with an X logo that has a springboard and a little robot. The Sonic is in a very dynamic pose, and it looks really nice. And I'd say this sculpt is definitely based on this pose from the Sonic X anime. Putting them side by side, Toy Island did an excellent job of capturing it. I'd say this is probably their best one-to-one translation yet. Toy Island really impressed me with this one. It actually looks really cool, and I'd love to own it one day if it wasn't so expensive. So definitely track it down if you can get it for a good price. However, by far their biggest improvement was definitely Tails. He actually looks like he has somewhat normal proportions for Tails this time, unlike last time. As we can see, he looks really nice, and is clearly based on the Sonic X stock renders as I've shown you right now. Comparing them side by side, we can see that, yeah, they did a pretty good job of replicating Tails' look from the show. Some slings are slightly off in the face, but it's not so bad. I'd say this is definitely an improvement. Would you get one? Hard to say. It's up to your preference if it's worth it. However, Knuckles is actually the complete opposite of Tails, as I don't really think this is much of an improvement. In fact, I'm really on my biggest issue with this figure right now. It's definitely the face. It just looks so uncanny, man. I don't know what they did. Now, as for inspiration, this figure does seem to be based on this piece of Sonic X artwork where Knuckles is standing straight. However, I don't think they did a very good job replicating it, and since it's not much of a pre-pose, the figure looks kind of boring as by comparison, as it's not very accurate, so you kind of want something like this to look stylized, so I wouldn't really recommend him unless you're tracking down the others. As for the new characters, Shadow looks really bad, honestly. It's the face again. The body looks alright. Compared to the Sonic X, this is the only screenshot I can find where he grits his teeth, and yeah, I don't think they based it off that directly. But I can't find what else they would have based it off of, so I'm just going to say it's a unique sculpt. But yeah, the body is fine. Face is bad. I wouldn't really recommend them. And lastly, we got Amy Rose, and she's clearly the worst figure in this wave. It's the pink arms, I'm just going to be honest. But even then, I can't tell what kind of artwork she's based on. Comparing her to the Sonic X design, we can see that she doesn't do a really good job of replicating it so well. So yeah. And I don't even know how these pink arms even happen, because if we look on the back of the box, we can see that it's actually the normal color. So I don't understand how Toy Island messed up if they had it not right the first time, but that does lead me to an interesting discussion, and that being the variants. The Sonic Gear website archives a bunch of the Sonic figures, and as we can see here, eventually Amy Rose was phased out for another Sonic, except it's not a different Sonic, it's the Sonic with the X logo just now with Amy's part. We also have a Knuckles height difference somehow, and Sonic with 2 different head sculpts for the running Sonic, which is weird. But speaking of different head sculpts, Shadow also got a different head sculpt, and it is far superior to the one that we got in the standard release. Seriously, look at the difference. It's night and day. And then we, strangest of all, we got this running Sonic with the red and gold piece of the robot, which is strange, and no one has found any of the others like that, so what a weird thing. But yeah, this is a decent wave overall. With the Meabot series all taken care of, let's move on to the Space Fighters, released to coincide with Season 3 of Sonic X. This depicts the cast in funny-looking spacesuits that each come with light-up weapons. They are a neat novelty, but not something you absolutely need to track down. However, that can be said for this figure called Robot, who is actually Missile Wrist from the Sonic X anime show. He actually features a light-up eye instead of the light-up weapons, and since I own him, I can show off his articulation. The head does not rotate due to the electronics, however, the arms fully spin, the wrists can shoot the missiles out by yanking on them, the legs rotate, and the thighs rotate. So yeah, this is actually a really cool little figure of Missile Wrist. I'm happy they made him. I'd say this is probably their best work in the line. However, because Toy Island loves to reuse things, we got the Metal Force line, which is the exact same thing as Space Fighter, except they use the heads from the Meabot figures, and the weapons no longer light up. Instead, they have shiny metallic paint. They look cool and are very rare, even rarer than Space Fighters, so do be wary of that if you're trying to track them down. However, Toy Island saved the best for last, as they made another action figures with Chaos Emeralds, starting with Sonic himself. We can see a huge improvement in overall look. This looks basically perfect. In fact, comparing it to what I believe it's based on, which is the Sonic X Thumbs Up Sonic render, yeah, this is by far Toy Island's best job replicating a Sonic render. So yeah, this is definitely their best Sonic. It took a few attempts, but they got there and they made something truly great. And same thing with Shadow. Shadow actually also looks pretty good. Face looks a little off, but it's not so bad anymore. And once again, he's based on his Sonic X rendering. And comparing them, once again, this is a very good job on the rendering front. And yeah, Sonic and Shadow, I think, are their best efforts here and are very accurate to how they look in the Sonic X anime, being a little more chibi-fied. So if you're a big fan of that aesthetic, you gotta track these down, but unfortunately, this entire assortment is rare, which we'll be talking about with the next 2 figures. One of the rarest Sonic figures to track down is the Sonic X action figures with Chaos Emerald's Cream and Cheese. And that's because this was the only Cream and Cheese for a while, but they look really accurate to how they look in the Sonic X anime. Can't find any specific render they seem to be based off of, but comparing them to the overall designs, they pitch perfect. So yeah, these two are also really well done, and Toy Island is showing how much they've improved since they first got the license. However, by far, Toy Island's rarest figure is Rouge the Bat, and that's because, like with Cream, this was the only Rouge figure for a good 15 years. She looks absolutely amazing, though, and is clearly based on her stock render from Sonic X. Comparing them side by side, this is basically perfect. But Rouge the Bat, along with Cream, Missile Wrist, and a few others, will show how good Toy Island sculpting could get when they put in the effort. These last 4 figures have been really great, but sadly there is a bummer in the line. The final figure in this assortment is Chris Thorndike himself, which I guess makes sense if you're doing a Sonic X toy line. However, the issue lies with the figure. He does not look very good. It's, once again, the face. Also, the articulation is pretty bad. Only his arms and head move. But compared to the render from the show, which is clearly his stock render, something just looks off about the figure. But you know what? Considering Toy Island's earlier efforts, this is actually kind of decent. And if you were a fan of Chris Thorndike, this is your only option, and it's not the worst thing possible, it's just the least good out of this wave. So yeah, Toy Island definitely went on a high note, as this was their final line of 5-inch figures. There only leaves one thing left to cover from them before we end the video. The final thing Toy Island released before they stopped making Sonic figures were the superposer figures of Sonic and Shadow. ostensibly based on Sonic X, judging by the packaging. However, when comparing the figures to the designs from Sonic X, they don't fit. Ironically, they kind of look more like the Sonic 06 designs, judging by the longer limbs. But as the name suggests, these figures are hyperposable. There's all the joints listed right now with this Sonic figure. The issue, though, is that there are too many joints that make the figures unstable to stand. Especially prominent with later releases, as these were not just released by Toy Island. Jazzwares, the company that succeeded Toy Island, ended up getting the Sonic license right after and re-released these along with the original Sonic Tails and Knuckles from the Sonic Adventure line one last time before making their own molds. However, Jazzwares also produced other superposer figures, including a Tails and a Knuckles, and the reason that's interesting is because of what I'll show you right now. This is a photo from the Sonic Gear website. These are prototypes of the Toy Island superposer Sonic and Shadow, but you can see that the Tails and Knuckles were also supposed to be made along with them. Sonic Gear also has these individual photos of Tails and Knuckles where we can take a look at them and see that they actually look pretty good and pretty close to how they look in Sonic X. We also have prototypes of Sonic and Shadow. Sonic here looks a little weird. He kind of reminds me of the Sonic Rush model for Sonic. It looks like a low polygon 3D model of modern Sonic, but it's not so bad. Shadow looks kind of disturbing though, not gonna lie. But yeah, these guys were updated, but Tails and Knuckles were not released. I should also mention that when Sonic and Shadow were released, they originally had their eyes placed wrong, but eventually that was corrected with later batches, and Jazzwares doesn't have this issue at all if you get those. We also do have one other last thing to discuss with Toy Island in terms of prototypes of stuff they did not make. Alright, so you guys remember Meabot Series 1? Well, that name was intentional because there was supposed to be a Series 2, but it wouldn't have featured any new characters. Instead, we got the running Sonic, who looks really weird. The action-y Sonic, who looks kind of funny, I'm not gonna lie. The Tails figure, who looks kind of disturbing, I'm not gonna lie, and has two mouths for some reason. Knuckles, who also has two mouths and just looks kind of derpy. A sassy looking Shadow that I love, and I really wish it came out because that's funny looking as hell. And Amy that looks about the same. So, no word on what the Meabot would have been, and yeah, this is kind of a lame wave in general. They probably could have made somebody else, but they were going to make something new at some point, or supposedly, because we found this Super Shadow figure that looks like their Meabot Super Shadow from the first Meabot series, and well, it looks about as good as that, but the shiny paint really does make it stand out, and it's the correct color, unlike, the Jax version of Super Shadow. So yeah, it would have been nice to see this, but I bet you're wondering, why no Super Sonic? Well, that would require them to make a new head because his quills spike up, and as we know, Toy Island was really big on reusing their body molds for everything. And with that, we have officially ended all of Toy Island's products that they've made. The last thing they ever made was a statue for the 15th anniversary that looks pretty good, but is not something I would really want to get into detail with. Were they as bad as I made them out to be on the thumbnail? Honestly, no. In a world where we have hyper-accurate Sonic figures, these more stylized, off-model looks have a charm to them, and I really love them and want to own more of them. That all being said though, I hope you all enjoyed the video. Please give it a like, give me a sub if you want to see more content like this. There's plenty more Sonic topics to make, and I will see you guys in the next video.